Something brought you here. Not an algorithm, not a coincidence. Something beneath the level of conscious reasoning. Something that recognized this moment before your mind had a chance to organize it into thought. Directed you to this precise place at this precise time. And before this ends, you will understand why. Perhaps you have been carrying something lately that sits just beneath the surface of ordinary life. Not grief exactly, not anger in the simple sense, something more specific. A growing awareness that the people around you, some of them very close, have not been responding to who you actually are. They respond to how you make them feel about themselves. And that difference has begun to quietly reshape everything. But here is what most people never realize. That awareness you carry, the one that makes conversations feel slightly staged, that makes certain smiles feel delayed, that makes certain compliments feel tense before they even finish being spoken. That awareness is not a flaw. It is not paranoia. It is not social anxiety or damaged trust from your past. It is perception. And perception, when it becomes sharp enough, changes your entire psychological landscape. Most people spend their lives believing that if someone dislikes them, they will see it clearly. They expect confrontation, direct rejection, obvious coldness. They believe human behavior is transparent when it wants to be understood. But not you. You are already noticing something different. That already tells you something important about where you are in this process. Today, Carl Jung philosophy is going to walk you through 7 psychological mechanisms that Carl Jung identified. 7 specific ways that awareness, growth, and psychological independence quietly generate resentment in the people closest to you. If even 3 of these feel familiar, you are not imagining what you have been sensing. You are simply beginning to see the architecture beneath it. Once you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Your greatest and most beautiful journey is the one that leads you back to yourself. Subscribe to Carl Jung philosophy and hit the like button, and let's walk that path together. You already understand something about people that most of them desperately hope you never perceive. And the moment you recognized it, something began to shift. Conversations started feeling rehearsed. Smiles felt slightly delayed. Compliments carried a strange tension beneath their surface. You did not manufacture that. What you are experiencing is the quiet consequence of perception. Because when you begin to see through people, their motivations, their insecurities, their subtle power arrangements, you unknowingly become a threat to the one thing most individuals guard at all costs: their illusion about themselves. And here is what nobody warns you about. Once this kind of awareness develops, it does not make you admired. It makes you dangerous. Not because you attack anyone, but because your mere presence quietly exposes what others spend their entire lives concealing. Their contradictions, their envy, their concealed weakness. People can sense that exposure even when you say absolutely nothing. So they begin to withdraw from you, not openly, never honestly. They do it with precision and subtlety. The warmth becomes slightly cooler. The invitations become less frequent. The tolerance for your presence quietly contracts, and you begin to feel something disorienting. A kind of invisible resistance forming in the space around you. This is where most people become genuinely confused. You did not deceive anyone. You did not wound anyone. Yet the hostility is unmistakable. What you are witnessing is a psychological response Carl Jung described decades ago with uncomfortable accuracy. When you begin to see the shadow in others, they begin to perceive you as the adversary. And the deeper your awareness becomes, the more people will quietly, secretly begin to resent you for it. Most people operate under the assumption that hostility begins with conflict, an argument, a betrayal, some identifiable offense. But the psychological reality is far colder than that. Long before a person openly dislikes you, their mind has already rendered a silent verdict. And that verdict rarely originates from anything you consciously did. This is the territory Carl Jung devoted much of his intellectual life to studying. Not the polished surface of human behavior, but the darker mechanisms operating beneath it. Jung observed that every human being carries something he called the shadow. The shadow is not simply evil. It is everything a person refuses to acknowledge about themselves. Their envy, their insecurity, their suppressed aggression, their hunger for dominance, their quiet sense of unworthiness. Most people invest their entire lives in protecting themselves from encountering this dimension of their own psyche. So, when someone appears who unintentionally reflects it back at them, the mind responds in a very specific and predictable manner. It projects. Instead of confronting their own shadow, people unconsciously place it onto the person who revealed it. Resentment begins accumulating long before logic can intervene. They feel evaluated even when you never evaluate them. They feel exposed even when you have said nothing. And the strangest part is that they often cannot articulate why they suddenly feel unsettled around you, because the hostility was never rational to begin with. It was entirely psychological. And once projection begins, something subtle occurs in your social environment. People stop responding to who you actually are. They start reacting to what your presence activates inside them. This is the quiet beginning of a dynamic most people never fully comprehend. Why someone can appear composed, respectful, even genuinely warm, while simultaneously developing a quiet resentment toward you beneath the surface. If you feel that number 11 carries weight for you, that invisible turning point where everything suddenly changes, drop 11 in the comments right now. The people who understand this are already watching. You probably carry a straightforward assumption about the individuals around you. You believe that if someone dislikes you, you will perceive it. You anticipate open conflict, cold language, unambiguous rejection. But the reality is far more unsettling. Most hostility never announces itself. It conceals itself. It smiles during conversations. It laughs at your remarks. It agrees with you in public, and then quietly begins undermining you the moment you leave the space. You think people respond to what you say. In reality, They respond to what your presence makes them feel about themselves. That distinction changes everything, because you can conduct yourself politely, remain respectful, sidestep confrontation entirely, and still provoke resentment in people who cannot tolerate the reflection you create. Your awareness becomes friction. Your composure becomes intimidation. Your refusal to engage in certain social performances begins to register as silent criticism to those who rely on them completely. You believe you are simply being perceptive, but inside other people's minds, something entirely different is unfolding. They feel evaluated, exposed, diminished. And the human psyche responds to that kind of exposure in a consistent and predictable manner. It defends itself, not through honesty, but through hostility concealed beneath ordinary seeming behavior. This is why you often sense a peculiar tension around certain individuals, but cannot fully account for it. Nothing obvious occurred. No argument, no direct insult. Yet the distance gradually expands, because what you are witnessing is not ordinary dislike. It is unconscious resentment. And once this process takes hold, the person involved rarely understands why they began turning against you. They only register one thing. Something about your presence makes them uncomfortable. And discomfort, when it remains unconscious long enough, quietly transforms into something that resembles hatred. 1. You trigger their shadow. Most people believe hostility originates from what you do. In reality, it frequently originates from what you expose. Your presence becomes a mirror. You speak with composure about discipline, and someone who quietly despises their own lack of self-discipline begins to feel irritated. You maintain emotional steadiness, and someone who consistently loses control begins to feel strangely defensive. You did not challenge them, but the comparison occurred automatically, without invitation. So the mind executes a psychological maneuver Jung called projection. Instead of acknowledging their own insecurity, they redirect that discomfort outward and anchor it to you. The narrative then transforms entirely. You become arrogant. You become cold. You become judgmental. These accusations have nothing to do with your actual behavior. They are simply your reflection of their shadow searching for somewhere to settle. And this is precisely where the tension originates. Because once someone unconsciously assigns their shadow to you, every subsequent interaction becomes distorted. They are no longer reacting to what you do. They are reacting to what you awaken inside them. 2. You reflect what they have not yet become. People rarely despise someone they perceive as weaker than themselves. Hostility typically flows in the opposite direction, toward the person who embodies something they privately know they should have become. You might believe your self-discipline inspires others, but inspiration is not the most common reaction. Comparison is. When someone observes a person who rises early with intention, builds something that carries meaning, or maintains emotional control under conditions that would destabilize most people, an unconscious calculation begins inside their mind. Why am I not capable of that? If that question becomes too uncomfortable to hold, the psyche discovers a different solution. It systematically reduces the perceived value of the person generating the comparison. Suddenly, your discipline becomes obsession. Your ambition becomes ego. Your independence becomes detachment or arrogance. This protects their self-concept, because if you are fundamentally flawed, they no longer have to face their own stagnation honestly. This is why people who begin actively improving their lives frequently observe something strange and disorienting. The moment they start genuinely evolving, certain relationships become quietly colder. Friends who once felt at ease around you start creating distance. Not because you failed them, but because your development disturbs the psychological equilibrium they quietly depended upon. You are no longer part of the same psychological story, and that rupture generates pressure that many people resolve in the most accessible way possible, by quietly resenting the person who moved forward. 3. You no longer need them. Dependency is one of the invisible currencies circulating through most social relationships. Many connections endure not because of mutual respect, but because of quiet psychological leverage. One person requires approval, another requires validation, another requires consistent emotional reassurance. This intricate network of subtle dependencies creates a kind of social stability that most people find deeply comforting. But when someone develops genuine psychological independence, something unusual and threatening occurs. The leverage evaporates. You stop pursuing constant validation. You stop explaining your decisions to people who were never genuinely interested in understanding them. You stop chasing approval in conversations that once had the power to shape your behavior entirely. From your perspective, this feels like maturation. From another person's perspective, it registers as loss, specifically, loss of influence. People who once felt central and essential in your psychological world suddenly feel peripheral, and human beings rarely acknowledge that loss with honesty. Instead, the mind restructures the situation into something more manageable. You have changed. You believe you are superior. You have become unreachable. But the genuine issue is rarely distance. The genuine issue is influence. When someone can no longer emotionally shape your responses, their significance in your psychological landscape diminishes. And some people experience that diminishment as a form of rejection. So resentment accumulates quietly, because independence does something particularly destabilizing in social environments. It dismantles the invisible hierarchy that many people unconsciously rely upon to feel significant. If the number 444 means something to you, that quiet internal signal that you are precisely where you need to be, even when others cannot see it, leave 444 below. You will recognize the people in this community who understand what that number holds. 4. You see through them. Most social interactions operate on an unspoken and mutually agreed upon arrangement. People perform certain roles: confident, generous, warmly supportive, effortlessly successful. These performances are not always deliberate fabrications, but they are rarely complete expressions of truth. Beneath the performance, everyone carries motivations they would strongly prefer to keep concealed. Status pursuit, insecurity, subtle manipulation, the fear of losing relevance or control. Most individuals navigate their social world successfully because those underlying motivations remain invisible. But certain people develop an acute ability to recognize patterns in behavior. You notice inconsistencies, a compliment that carries a quiet hostility beneath it, generosity that materializes only when something is required in return, authority that sustains itself through intimidation rather than genuine competence. Once you begin perceiving these patterns with clarity, something subtle but consequential shifts in your behavior. You stop reacting the way manipulators anticipate. You do not pursue their approval. You do not respond to emotional pressure on cue. You do not reward subtle power performances with the reaction they were designed to produce. And manipulators sense that shift immediately. Even when you say nothing, even when you maintain perfect composure, because manipulation depends entirely on predictable reactions. When those predictable reactions no longer materialize, the manipulator encounters something they find genuinely intolerable: the loss of control. So their manner toward you begins to alter. The warmth becomes guarded. The tone carries a new edge. And beneath that shift lies a simple psychological truth. People feel at ease around those they can shape. They become quietly hostile toward those who can perceive through them. 5. You refuse to perform the expected role. Carl Jung identified something he called the persona, the social mask individuals wear in order to function within the structures and expectations of collective life. The accommodating colleague, the endlessly supportive companion, the unthreatening acquaintance who never disturbs the emotional balance of the group. Most people rely heavily and almost entirely on this mask. It keeps relationships smooth, predictable, and comfortable for everyone involved. But when someone begins to genuinely question these inherited roles, something deeply unsettling occurs. You stop performing certain expectations without apology. You no longer pretend to agree when you do not. You do not perform amusement at remarks designed to reinforce group hierarchy. You disengage from conversations that feel structurally manipulative or psychologically hollow. From your own perspective, this feels like authenticity, perhaps the most honest version of yourself you have inhabited. From the group's perspective, it registers as disruption, because social collectives operate on silent contracts. Every member performs their designated role. Every member protects the shared illusion. The instant someone exits that structure, the entire system becomes unstable. And destabilized systems react with aggression toward the individual who generated the disruption. You become difficult, intense, exhausting to engage with. Not because you harmed anyone, but because you ceased cooperating with the psychological performance that kept everyone comfortable and in their designated positions. And that refusal consistently pushes people into a defensive hostility they cannot always explain or justify. 6. You established boundaries they had learned to live without. For a considerable period, you may have been straightforward to be around in the way that is actually exhausting. Always reachable, always accommodating, always willing to absorb behavior that quietly depleted your energy and replaced it with nothing. People rarely raise concerns
about someone with weak psychological boundaries, because weak boundaries make the existence of everyone else considerably more convenient. You listened far longer than was reasonable. You forgave things that deserved acknowledgement rather than erasure. You carried emotional burdens that were never legitimately yours to hold. But eventually, something fundamental shifted. You began registering patterns with clarity. You recognized who only materialized when they needed something from you. You noticed who disappeared consistently when the dynamic reversed. And slowly, with deliberate intention, you began modifying your behavior in ways that reflected your actual worth. You said no with conviction. You stepped back from dynamics that only ever moved in one direction. You stopped providing unrestricted access to your time, your energy, your attention, your emotional capacity. From your perspective, this was the beginning of genuine self-respect. From another person's perspective, it felt like deprivation, because the quiet benefits they had grown accustomed to extracting from your lack of boundaries suddenly ceased to be available. They could no longer unload without consequence. They could no longer depend on your emotional availability as a permanent resource. They could no longer assume your forgiveness as a guarantee. And people rarely respond with grace when an established privilege disappears. Instead, they reconstruct the situation in a way that preserves their self-concept. You have become self-centered. You have hardened. You are more difficult to reach now. But the underlying reality is more direct and less flattering to them. You did not become selfish. You simply stopped being convenient. And that specific shift has a reliable way of converting quiet comfort into quiet resentment, particularly when it exposes what has always been operating beneath the surface of the relationship. Drop 528 in the comments if you have started feeling this. That moment when you began choosing your own energy over someone else's convenience, and the relationship quietly changed overnight. The frequency of transformation begins with that exact choice. 7. You are evolving, and they have chosen not to. Human relationships depend heavily on familiarity, on the reassurance that everyone will remain within the predictable parameters established over years of shared experience. The same conversations, the same collective ambitions, the same emotional patterns that have defined the dynamic since the beginning. Personal growth, when it becomes genuine and sustained, disrupts that stability at the foundation. When someone begins evolving psychologically, thinking in new frameworks, behaving from new principles, orienting themselves toward different horizons, the familiar pattern fractures. And fractured patterns create distance that feels profound and irreversible. Initially, people attempt to draw you back toward the version of yourself they understood. They introduce humor about your changes. They reference how you used to engage. They apply subtle social pressure to coax you back into the psychological mold they found comfortable and readable. But if the transformation continues and deepens, something shifts permanently. The gap between you solidifies. Your conversations carry a new quality. Your values no longer align in the ways they once did. Your capacity to tolerate certain behaviors quietly disappears. And the person observing this transformation from the outside encounters something deeply uncomfortable. A silent question they may not have the resources to face honestly. Why have I remained unchanged? If they cannot answer that with honesty, the psyche locates the most accessible form of protection available. It assigns responsibility for the discomfort to the person who changed.
your growth becomes arrogance. Your psychological distance becomes betrayal. Your clarity becomes judgment directed at them specifically. Because directing resentment toward the evolving person requires considerably less courage than confronting the stagnation within oneself. And this is the quiet pattern most people never fully recognize. Hostility rarely originates with conflict. It originates with reflection. And once someone encounters a reflection they find intolerable, the relationship quietly begins to fracture in ways that rarely repair themselves. The psychological core, what is genuinely occurring beneath all of this.
Most people operate under the assumption that interpersonal hostility originates with personality incompatibility. But Carl Jung understood something far more disturbing and far more precise about the architecture of the human psyche. Hatred frequently begins inside the person experiencing it, long before it has any meaningful connection to your actual behavior. The key mechanism operating beneath all of this is shadow projection. Every individual constructs a personality that the world is permitted to observe. Jung named this the persona, the social mask that sustains functional existence in collective life. Polished, composed, reasonable, dependable. But the persona is fundamentally incomplete. Behind it resides the shadow, the suppressed impulses, accumulated resentments, concealed fears, and unacknowledged weaknesses that threaten the image a person has carefully built and maintained about themselves. The problem is that the shadow does not dissolve with time or willpower. It waits. And when someone appears who unintentionally surfaces those concealed elements, the psyche responds with something that resembles an immune reaction. You might simply express an honest observation. You might remain composed when others around you become destabilized. You might disengage from manipulation or emotional theater. But those behaviors generate something dangerous in others: contrast. They throw into sharp relief the mask someone else is wearing. And contrast, by its very nature, exposes what the persona was constructed to conceal. This is the moment when unconscious resentment begins its formation. The mind cannot easily assimilate the truth about itself, so it performs a psychological displacement. It attaches the discomfort to the person who activated it rather than confronting the source within. Suddenly, the narrative transforms. You become cold. You become arrogant. You become the problem. These conclusions are rarely deliberate distortions. They are psychological defense mechanisms operating beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. The person arrives at these conclusions genuinely, because accepting the alternative would require them to face dimensions of themselves they have invested years in avoiding. Jung maintained that confronting the shadow is essential for what he called individuation, the gradual process of becoming psychologically whole and genuinely integrated. But individuation is an uncommon achievement. Most people select the more immediately comfortable path. They reinforce their persona. They reject the reflection. And they gradually distance themselves from anyone whose presence places the stability of their self-image under pressure, which arrives at a truth that is simultaneously brutal and liberating. People do not direct their hostility toward you because you caused them harm. They direct their hostility toward you
because your presence quietly dismantles the narrative they depend upon to maintain their self-concept. And when a person must choose between protecting that narrative or confronting the truth beneath it, most will select the narrative without hesitation, even when doing so requires turning against someone who never wronged them. If the number 777 has appeared in your life at moments when something important was becoming clear, in sequences that felt too deliberate to ignore, drop 777 below. Alignment has a way of announcing itself to those who have developed the awareness to recognize it. The real-world patterns you have most likely already encountered. This dynamic rarely surfaces as open confrontation. It manifests in small behavioral shifts that feel genuinely strange, but remain difficult to articulate or verify. Consider friendships. In the beginning, the connection feels natural and unguarded. Conversations flow easily. You exchange perspectives, ambitions, observations about the nature of life and people. But as your thinking begins to shift, as you develop the ability to see through certain behavioral patterns and decline to participate in them, the quality of the interactions gradually transforms. Your friends begin introducing humor about your seriousness. They find amusement when you discuss self-discipline or intentional living. They describe you as intense. They occasionally dismiss your perspective before you have finished articulating it. On the surface, this sounds like ordinary social friction. But the energy beneath it carries a different quality. What once felt like genuine connection now carries a subtle undertow of resistance. Not confrontation, simply quiet withdrawal. The identical pattern emerges in professional environments. A colleague who once seemed genuinely collegial begins demonstrating passive resistance. They interrupt you during collaborative discussions. They subtly introduce doubt about your competence to others. They express agreement when you are present and quietly work against your interests when you are not. Nothing sufficiently explicit to justify direct confrontation, but enough to generate consistent tension and uncertainty. Then there is the family dimension, which often carries the sharpest edges. The people who once expressed genuine encouragement begin questioning every meaningful decision you make. Why are you approaching life with such intensity? You have shifted too dramatically. You used to be more accessible. On the surface, this registers as concern, but the communication beneath it is unmistakable. They were more psychologically comfortable with the version of you that demanded less honest reflection from them. Even support begins to carry an uncomfortable quality. Someone acknowledges your progress, but the enthusiasm feels performative. Affirmations arrive with embedded criticism attached. The encouragement comes packaged with a quiet warning. Because your growth is being tolerated within the relationship, not genuinely welcomed and celebrated. And after sufficient exposure to this pattern, the shape of it becomes impossible to ignore. The more perceptive you become, the more consistently certain people begin withdrawing, not because you acted against them, but because your presence has become a reflection they find increasingly difficult to encounter. The transformation, when the pattern resolves into clarity. Initially, this pattern generates genuine confusion. You attempt to analyze what you may have done wrong. You revisit conversations in your mind with careful attention. You ask yourself whether you inadvertently created the distance you are now experiencing. But eventually, a different realization begins to emerge and solidify. The hostility did not appear after you failed. It appeared after you transformed. After you became more difficult to manipulate. After you stopped pursuing approval with the consistency that others had come to depend upon. After you began perceiving dynamics that other people strongly prefer to keep unexamined. This is when the entire situation reframes itself in a way that changes everything. Because the resentment you encounter is not arbitrary or random. It is information. Not about your behavior, but about the psychological pressure your presence generates in others. People rarely direct sustained resentment toward someone who is straightforward to influence. They reserve that resentment for the person who quietly refuses the invisible rules that everyone else follows without question. The person who does not require constant external validation to maintain their sense of self. The person who perceives patterns that others have collectively agreed to pretend are invisible. The person who cannot be easily pulled back into the roles that made others feel secure. This is precisely why awareness functions as a form of protection. Once you genuinely understand what is occurring beneath these social dynamics, the confusion dissolves. You stop anticipating universal approval as a measure of your worth. You stop interpreting every negative reaction as evidence of a personal failure. Instead, you begin recognizing a deeper and more meaningful pattern. Some people draw closer to you because they are capable of valuing truth and presence over comfort and performance. Others create distance because your presence destabilizes the stories they depend upon to maintain their self-concept. And this is the shift most people never arrive at. The moment when rejection stops registering as loss and begins revealing with precision exactly who was never genuinely aligned with you in the first place. Final reflection. At some point, the pattern becomes impossible to look away from. The more clearly you perceive people, their motivations, their performances, their underlying fears, the more complex your relationships become. Not because you became hostile or withdrew from human connection, but because awareness permanently alters the manner in which you move through the world and engage with other people. You stop performing amusement at things that are not genuinely amusing. You stop normalizing behavior that quietly corrodes your integrity. You stop participating in social arrangements built on manipulation, insecurity, and low-level competition for position and relevance. And once that transformation occurs, something follows that you did not necessarily anticipate. You become increasingly difficult to place within other people's existing frameworks and expectations. You do not respond the way they have calculated. You do not seek approval with the consistency they relied upon to feel significant in your life. That unpredictability makes many people genuinely uncomfortable, because approval has always been a mechanism of control. The instant you stop requiring it, that mechanism ceases to function. So some people will increase their distance. Some will develop a quiet resentment. Others will construct narratives that position you as the problem, the one who changed, the one who became difficult, the one who lost something valuable in becoming more aware. But the truth operating beneath every one of those reactions is the same.
When someone can no longer shape how you perceive yourself, their opinion surrenders the power it once carried over your inner world. Most people will encounter ideas like these and move away from them quickly, not because the ideas are inaccurate, but because once you genuinely begin recognizing these patterns in your actual life, it becomes permanently impossible to move through human relationships the way you once did. You begin registering motivations beneath surface behavior. You begin perceiving the quiet tension operating beneath certain relationships that once felt simple and safe. And that perception restructures your entire experience. So if this found resonance with something you have already been observing and feeling, you are not constructing it. Write, "I see it now," in the comments. Because the further you follow this territory into its depths, the fewer comfortable illusions survive, and the more clearly you begin to see what was always actually there.